What's going on, students of history? You're here, you're back. Land's History Flip Classroom. Let's giddy up and get into today's video. The title of today's video is The First Amendment, the Bill of Rights. This video is going to focus on the First Amendment of that bill. So use your Cornell notes, students. Remember that you'll be using the right side of your journal pages. We're going to do good strategies, right? So we're going to think it through. We're going to pause and rewind as we need to. We're going to be listening very well as to get those answers from this video. Let's dive into the vocabulary. Here's where we're going to start with the vocabulary. We're going to use some simple vocabulary today, which includes the word, and I'll read them for you: bill, amendment, that's a big one, the press, assembly, and petition. So these are going to be part of that First Amendment right. Here we go. Big question for the lesson. What rights did the Bill of Rights guarantee to individuals, Americans? And why is this First Amendment such an important part of our American way of life, to our rights? If you don't know the First Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, then you're struggling out there in life. You got to know it well because it affects you so much. So before we get into this First Amendment, let's do a little rewind here. The rewind is that we go back to the Constitutional Convention, and we had aside a group of men called the Anti-Federalists. They were against the ratification, the passing of the Constitution. Now, there was a reason for this. They didn't just necessarily want to destroy government, but they wanted something that the document lacked. It didn't have, the original Constitution did not have something. Do you remember what that was? And this is what these Anti-Federalists wanted. They were demanding that before the Constitution were passed, that a Bill of Rights be added. A Bill of Rights. A bill is a document. It's another way of saying it's a document of rights. Now, these Anti-Federalists wanted to protect individual liberties. That means they were looking to protect your liberties as an American, your rights from the federal government. Now, remember, the federal government was still this idea that it was the boogeyman and that the federal government could get too strong and attack and hurt us on our individual level. So the Anti-Federalists were desperate to get a Bill of Rights that would protect you to the Constitution. So what happens? Well, when the Bill of Rights is added in 1789, the Anti-Federalists are happy. So those first 10 amendments, 10, are considered the document of rights, the Bill of Rights. So the first 10. Now, where did this come from? Well, to get the Constitution passed, good old father of the Constitution, Mr. James Madison, fourth president, future fourth president, he sits down and creates the first Bill of Rights that we get our individual rights from. Now, he did this to get those Anti-Federalists to agree to sign that Constitution, to ratify it. So good old James Madison, not only does he craft the Constitution, he also comes through hard with those Bill of Rights. So that's a little rewind for you kids. Now let's fast forward here. What is a right? What do we mean by right? Do we mean our hands? Do we mean the side on us? No, what right is a thing that you are allowed to do. It is nature. It is a law. And by this reason, look at that word nature and law. We got to go back to a lesson from before that we learned in the Declaration of Independence. There was a philosopher from England named John Locke. And he wrote in his treatise book that he believed that laws weren't natural, meaning that they came from a higher power. And because we people were made in that image, we had those rights. They were naturally given to us. Now, his rights included life, liberty, and property. Now, if you remember, good old TJ, Thomas Jefferson, he includes unalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence, which he writes were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So because we consider rights to be natural, they cannot be taken away from us. The U.S. government, even the federal government, cannot deny our individual rights. It's our liberty, it's our privilege that is granted to us by that Constitution, by that document. It says that you're an American and you have these rights and they are yours and they cannot be taken away from you. That's a right. So here are the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights. Now, we are not going to focus on all 10 in this video because we are going to focus on only the first one. So what is an amendment? An amendment, it simply means to change or add to the Constitution. Now, they don't go in with an eraser and erase the Constitution. No, they amend it, they fix it, they add to it. Now, Article 5 is the article that the Constitution has to give to amend it. Article 5, remember those articles in the Constitution, kids? There's 7. Well, Article 5 is that power that lets us make those changes as a government. There have been 27 amendments total added to the Constitution, which is pretty interesting because that means there's been 27 additions to the Constitution. So we're going to focus on that number 1 right there you see in the red square. We're going to focus on that freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. So let's dive in. Here we go, and giddy up. Amendment number 1. Now, as I read this, try to pick out those rights. See if you can find them in there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition. So when I look through that First Amendment, that sounds like a mouthful, I see 5 sections. I see religion. I also see that there's something about speech. I see something called a press. And then I see that we have a right to an assembly and a petition. So we want to break this First Amendment down into 5 provisions or 5 parts. So let's look at the 5 parts of this very, very massively important amendment. Now, going back to the beginning of the colonial Americas, you remember that Puritans and Pilgrims came over from England looking for religious freedom. Now, this is a really important part of American life. So the first provision, or the first part of the First Amendment, is that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. So there should be a separation of the church and the state. By the state, we mean the government, its power. So does the U.S. have an official religion? Do we know if we do? No, we don't. Now, this is what the First Amendment is saying, that there is no official religion for anyone that isn't a U.S. citizen. And because of that reason, the second part of this amendment that talks about religion, it says we cannot prohibit the exercise of your religion. So whatever liberty you want to have as a person to pray and to worship a God, that is your choice. So in America, we want to keep that government separate from that religion so that you can have that freedom to choose what religion you want to be. Now, even the great Thomas Jefferson wrote about it when he says, erecting the wall of separation between the church and the state, that's the government, is essential to a free society. So he didn't mean literally build a wall between 2 buildings, but it kind of comes across as that because we want to preserve that right that people have to pray and to choose as they want to pray. And the U.S. government cannot tell you otherwise. So this has become a cornerstone of American democracy, this freedom to pray. Now, this leads us to the ever important expression or speech freedom. Now, there are some places in the world that don't allow its citizens to have that kind of freedom. If you speak out in China or even Russia, you might get punished by the government themselves. And this is a cornerstone of American life, the ability to express ourselves through our art, through our music, even with the clothes we wear. We are speaking out about who we are. And it shows that we have this expression, this opinion as Americans to have. We take it for granted sometimes because in other parts of the world it doesn't exist. Now, there are limits to that speech. When we have that free speech, you have to remember that there are consequences and limits. For instance, there is something called slander and libel. Slander and libel is when spoken or written lies hurt someone's reputation. That cannot be allowed. Whenever your words or your actions are hurting someone's reputation and livelihood, that is where the government draws the line. Examples of this would be if you were to work in government and share top secret information that could hurt the country, that's not allowed as speech. Or if you're making threats of violence against someone, that's not allowed as speech. Even causing public panic, not allowed as speech. So libel is when written lies are written. So a magazine can print things that aren't true, and they can be sued for those lies. Also, when we go into a plane, for instance, and we sit down on an airplane and we yell the word bomb, trying to scare people, even if it's a joke, that is punishable. That's a limit. That is not free speech. So there are consequences and limits to the speech that we have. So be careful on how you use that freedom that you have. This leads us to the next part of the First Amendment, freedom of the press. Now, a lot of us don't know what that means. The press is journalism, media, social media, news, newspapers, even magazines. So the press is a cornerstone of our government because it serves as a watchdog over what the government does and it reports on it. So when the people find out about what the government does, it is keeping that government in check. So letting the press have that freedom to write and to speak about what the government does is massively important to keeping our freedoms and our rights in check. So that watchdog of the media is really important. And remember, in other parts of the world, the press can be kept down. It can be controlled, like in places like North Korea or China. And that can lead to a lot of public misinformation. And that can hurt our liberties. That can hurt our rights. The press is sometimes considered the fourth branch of government because of how important their job is to report on what government does. That takes us to the next fourth provision or part of the First Amendment, the right of people to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. Now, if you remember, a petition is an actual formal document that you can sign. So a lot of people put their names together and they sign a petition speaking out against something they don't agree with. So according to this provision, you have the right to speak out against your government. That is a grievance. Remember that from the Declaration. A grievance is a complaint. I don't like something. I want to speak out about it. I'm going to sign my name on this document to show my government that I'm not happy with something that they've done. And you have that right to get together with others and sign and tell the government you're not happy with them. That is your right under the First Amendment. Lastly, but not leastly, I know it says provision 3 on the top, so forgive me, but we're near the end here, provision 5. We have the freedom to assemble. We are going to be able to, as a cornerstone of American life, get together with people. Now, if you notice carefully in these pictures, notice the actions of the people that are assembling or gathering. Yes, this can be to promote something. Yes, this can even be in a form of protest. But notice carefully that these people are peacefully assembling. Assemblies must be peaceful. So there are certain limits to assemble together in government. Assemblies must be peaceful. You also cannot block public ways or public roadways with your assembly because that is a violation of the law. Also, permits may be required for a large group to get together. And as long as it's on public property, you can get together and assemble and cheer or chant or protest for anything that you like without fear of punishment. That is a right. So, covering the First Amendment, we have looked at religion, freedom of your speech, your expression, freedom of the media, the press, and the freedom to assemble, get together, and to petition or write your name out against the government for a grievance. I hope that has made sense to you. We're going to cover these more in depth in class. You guys have been an awesome audience. I want to say, if you're here, you're full of energy, and your giddy up is good. So I want to say, awesome guys, and I'll see you in class. All right? Peace.